Let's see if I can change a slide. All right, we are in. Okay, everybody. Well, my name is Ron Greene. I'm from Enertech Labs, and Enertech Labs has been around since 2005, manufacturing its own fuel products and dealing with diesel, gasoline, heating oil, anything from small engine to heavy truck, excavators, big equipment, marine. We've been around. This chemistry that we use has been around for many, many years. It's not something that we've invented. It's what refineries use. But today, in my background also is dealing with Ford, dealing with Kenworth, some heavy truck, but in sales and parts, and all the way through to now being the owner of this particular company. So since 2008, I've done nothing but fuel. So there's been a lot of changes in that time frame with the engines, with the fuel itself, and I'm here to just really take us in sort of an in-depth on fuel. So I'm going to make my way through a bunch of slides just so you can see some visuals of what I'm speaking of. But the bottom line is diesel fuel today is not our granddaddy's diesel, and it's certainly gasoline the same. So fuel is not created. Every drop of fuel that you have out there can be different than the last drop that you've had. So we are going to go through that so you have a better understanding of what is in your fuel, how it affects your engines, and what you can do to keep those engines kind of running better. So bear with me. And again, if anybody has any questions, let me know. So the good and bad, the ugly of diesel fuel. Everybody knows that we're currently using ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel. It used to be just diesel fuel, which was high sulfur. Back in the 90s became low sulfur and continued into low sulfur and ultra-low sulfur in the 2000s. The idea behind this is to reduce the amount of sulfur in the fuel, which reduced acid rain, lowered emissions, created a cleaner fuel at that point. But there were side effects on the refining process, which caused this fuel to actually attract and hold dissolved water 2 times as much as previous fuels. So this causes a lot of problems in our fuel. In the past, it used to be okay in a storage tank to leave an inch of water at the bottom or a ½ inch of water because it was oil and water. Water would fall to the bottom. There'd be really nominal dissolved water in that fuel. Now you can have up to 2 gallons per 1,000 in diesel fuel without seeing it. It looks clear and bright and beautiful out of your pump handle. You're going to look at that fuel and it's going to look like great diesel fuel. But 2 gallons per 1,000 is enough to start corrosion. It'll certainly be enough to cause freezing in the fuel line, create deposits. Oil and water, they really don't like each other. So we'll discuss biodiesel and the effects of that. We'll discuss water, the deposits that happen and form from that, and that in combination with very high-tech engines really causes some problems. So this also causes kind of the ugly stuff, which is bacteria forming, which clogs filters, poor burning or poor combustion of that fuel, and can cause injector damage or failure. So storage is a big deal. If you look at your fuel in the past, like I just said, it was okay to leave a ½ inch of water at the bottom, and maybe you had to deal with some bacteria. But as you store fuel and with temperature changes, especially as now more and more tanks are being installed above ground, we have tremendous swings in temperature during every single day. So a 7-degree change, a rise or fall in temperature will cause condensation. That condensation will drip its way into the tank. Certainly that water will fall to the bottom. But if there's standing water at the bottom, that means the dissolved water in the fuel is always at maximum level. If it wasn't, it would drink that water off the bottom. So depending on the temperature, it's always absorbing more or spitting out more to the bottom. Now the problem is when you're filling up from the fuel station or you're filling up out of your yard tank, you're pumping fuel out of that tank. Well, that liquid leaving the tank has to be replaced by something. So there's certainly vent tubes in the tops of all of these tanks that allow air to pump in. So air gets sucked in along with spores, mold spores, bacteria, yard debris. There could be dust in the air, little bits of grains. Moisture certainly gets absorbed, sucked into the tank, and that causes a lot of bacteria to grow. So bacteria actually live on the layer between the water and the fuel, finds its way to water, and that's where it'll grow, and it'll continue to grow. And that water in the bottom can cause corrosion in the tank itself. It can cause damage in your engines, but more importantly, it's going to kind of grow this bacteria and sludge in the bottom. So if you look at these storage tanks, at this image, what you're going to see is where the pump is, where you see the pump handle. At the bottom, there's a little screen, and that sits 6 to 8 inches from the bottom of the tank. And the idea is we don't want to suck up any standing water. But whatever's down there, as you start pumping to fill a 100-gallon fuel tank, you're going to swirl that product around, and it's going to suck it up and through. That's why filters are a must. Now, filters on a fuel tank might be typically are about a 10 micron to 30 micron fuel filter. And that used to be okay on older engines, but now newer engines are down to 3 and 4 microns. So, we're getting rid of the large debris that might be in this storage tank. And as you'll see on the left, that tall tube is the vent tube. And on the top, there's just a little wire screen. That's it. So every time you pump out of the fuel handle, you're sucking in debris that might be in the outside air. So anybody who has a storage tank that might be in just a gravel lot, we see this a lot with construction companies. Every time those trucks come roaring into that lot, they kick up a lot of dust. If someone's filling at the time, it sucks that dust right in. And we see literally gravel at the bottom of some of these tanks. And those little particles and debris particles can cause major havoc in an engine. And of course, the fuel filters are designed to catch those. This is, believe it or not, water and fuel samples. These are separate samples from separate tanks in Western New York. These could be school bus, municipality. These are fuel stations. Many, even if they're a high volume, high frequency fuel station, we found terrible water contamination. It could be a leaky pipe underground. When you go to a gas station, most of the tanks are underground tanks. There's vent tubes that go along the side of the building. They go down underground and into the tank. You can get a corrosion in those vent tubes and leakage into those tanks. We fix many of those. I work with a lot of companies that repair those tanks, and we break the water down to prevent damage from happening and save the fuel and restore it to good operating fuel. So again, water's our enemy. Icing's an issue. Corrosion is an issue. If there's standing water present, bacteria can grow. Without water, bacteria, their cells are filled with water. If you dry that fuel out, that bacteria will die. So it's always lurking there in the background, waiting to grow. And that bacteria level, you'll see actually on some of these samples, you'll see a hazy line between the water at the bottom. All these different colored water bottoms are rust and debris, and some of it, that second one in, is clear. And you'll see dead bacteria laying on the bottom, but you'll see living bacteria on the layer in between the two floating. All right. So that's something you really want to avoid, because those mold spores can actually get into each of your vehicles if you're filling, and they can only be really killed by a biocide or drying the fuel out, just extremely drying the fuel out. So water's a problem. Bosch actually said that their injectors are designed to go 1 million miles, but they're only lasting 250,000. And they said dissolved water is a major, major problem. And at high pressure, it's causing microscopic damage to the injectors, to the needles, to the tips. Corrosion along the valve bodies or along the inside of the injectors is a major problem. The paragraph down there that says, it's right out of the brochure here, says, the majority of engine problems stem from contaminated fuel. Corrosion problems, it's hard to read on this small screen. Corrosion problems are from water contamination in the fuel caused by improper storage. And this corrosion is what's causing major problems. So their solution was to put a $1,500 desiccant system on the intake of the vent tube that you saw in the tank, which is a great idea. The problem is that fuel comes out of the pipeline, gets stored, gets transported, stored again, finally makes it to your tank. It can already be contaminated with moisture. So we chemically break that water down to prevent the damage from happening. And this is what we can do. We can actually take a severely contaminated fuel, treat it, and draw it back to clear and bright. And actually, in that state, no corrosion. We won't freeze anymore. It will prevent a lot of bad problems that can happen. Let me see if I can start this video. Linda, I might not be able to actually run a video. Oh, that's a terrible thing.
That's okay. I can go ahead and run that.
Oh, you can? Okay.
Yeah. I'm muting the audio and then.
Okay.
There you go. It's running.
All right. It's not on my end. But anyway, this video, what we're trying to show here is basically a video of the prior screen, which is showing that we can chemically break water down with the addition of our base product, which is called Enerfuel for diesel, and it's called GasRx for gasoline. And we can return that back to clear and bright, and it's a permanent chemical change. What it does is actually creates a bond between water and fuel, molecule by molecule. It's called dispersion. So fuel is hydrogen and carbon, water's hydrogen and oxygen, and it binds those hydrogen atoms together, and it allows, in this particular case with gasoline, allows the ethanol to stay blended in the fuel. And with diesel, it allows that water to stay dissolved into that fuel chemically. It does not, it's small enough, it's chemically bound molecule by molecule, so it's not large enough to cause any damage to injectors. And, oh, is this going to work now? Oh, it is going to work. Okay. I don't know if everyone can see this, but it's finally working here. So a few drops of water, this happens to be ethanol gasoline. And with a shake, what you're going to see is it turns into a lemonade-looking gasoline. So what we're doing is we're bringing that gasoline to its maximum dissolved water content. And now that water will actually start to fall to the bottom. But before that happens, you'll see oils that form on this container, and that will harden. Those oils will become a gum, harden into a varnish, and cause major problems. With this addition of GasRx, you're going to see that this fuel turns back to clear and bright instantly. Now, you might think, well, that's a bunch of hocus pocus, but we fixed 10 and 20,000 gallon tanks where the refinery said to throw away that gasoline. So if you think of gas now at $3 and $4 a gallon, to throw away as hazmat 10,000 gallons at $3 or $4 a gallon is a costly matter. And then have the tank cleaned and refill it. You're well over $100,000. We actually fixed this for just a couple of $1,000s of additive and labor, fixed these gas stations, sent the fuel out for testing, and all the refineries said it passed all the ASTM tests as A-grade gasoline. So what happens in this, and we'll talk about gas a little bit more actually, so what happens is we're breaking that water down, we're allowing it to stay dissolved molecule by molecule, safely passing through the engine, and it won't separate back out. I've actually taken diesel and gasoline and done this mixture, put it in up in Winnipeg, Manitoba at minus 35 standing temperature, wedged it out there in a snowbank, never froze, never came back apart, never a problem. So we've tested it in extreme conditions. So minus, plus 8 degrees is really nothing, but compared to that minus 35. So biodiesel, here's another mix. So we're talking about diesel fuel that's made out of petroleum. And that's basically taking a barrel of crude, boiling it down. You get 180 different chemicals out of a barrel of crude, and the mid-level distillate is going to be diesel fuel. If you keep that distillation happening more and more, you'll end up with gasoline. Vapors come off actually before the diesel fuel. Then you end up with thicker lube oils and eventually asphalt and, road tar that we make roads out of. They take that really thick stuff and crack it and reblend. They try to liquefy some of that thicker stuff and create more diesel fuel. So you'll have asphalt droplets in the fuel, and that's important to talk about because you'll end up with another contamination down the road with these high temperature, high pressure engines. Along with all the troubles that happen with diesel fuel, biodiesel is a problem. Biodiesel is an issue because we're blending that in at 3 to 5% in most cases during the year round. And then even in the summertime, we get up as high as 10 and 11%. In Illinois, it's mandated to be 11%. There's a little less BTUs in that fuel, so over-the-road guys that'll fill up in Illinois will lose about a half a mile per gallon on a 7 or 8 mile per gallon vehicle. More importantly, it attracts 10 times the amount of water. B100 attracts 10 times the amount of water that straight petroleum diesel would have. So that being the case, we're exasperating the problem that's already there with ultra low sulfur. We're actually creating more water problems and more deposits in those engines. Biodiesel can gel up also at very, very high temperatures. So a vegetable oil-based biodiesel or fatty acid methyl esters is the fat side of the animal renderings that we use as biodiesel. Those things can gel at much higher temperatures. I had New York State DOT along I-86 down there, along the 86 corridor in Chautauqua County. One residency was running perfectly fine. The other one was gelled up at, about plus 39 to 40 degrees. And one had 4.6% pork fat. The other one had 4.8% vegetable oil. So obviously you could tell which one gelled up. The pork fat thickened right up. We had to use a product we sell to liquefy that and get those trucks running again. It's easy to do, but it's just a hassle. And right in the state bid for that fuel was zero biodiesel. Well, these fuel suppliers have no idea because the federal government said that you can put up to 5% and not tell anybody. And that's due to the fact that the refineries are under pressure to create a renewable resource. So between biodiesel and ethanol, they have to have a certain amount of gallons year-round that they supply as renewable, or they get fined. So nobody really, it depends. Certain people like biodiesel, others don't. When you're out there in the world of plowing snow in the wintertime, it can be a nightmare for you. All right, if the temperature drops and you have some biodiesel, it can cause some major problems. I've seen chicken fat, beef tallow, pork fat. Those are the worst. Getting into different types of soy and different types of biodiesel has really it can be passed through without much of a problem. Sort of the soybean oils are some of the best. Engine problems can form when using biodiesel. Something called metal carboxylates or carboxylic acids. Some of the storage situations that the fuel is in combination with those fatty acid methyl esters or monoacids can cause a sort of an oxidation layer or corrosion. It can corrode iron surfaces. It can also cause a carboxylic salt layer. So what that means for you and your engines is that this layer can build up on the inside of the injectors and in the fuel systems and restrict fuel flow. It can also cause a sticking point for the injectors. So some of these needles can stick, preventing the engine from running properly, causing some problems with runnability, starting, hard starting, rough running. major problems with those engines. So it's important to know that these things can be avoided by using the right injector cleaners, by watching to make sure if there's at all possible not to use biodiesel in your fuel systems, or make sure you know that you need to do something to prevent further issues. So you'll see on this, this is the inside of, on the very top of the two metal tubes, that's the inside of a newer injector. And you'll see deposits on the left, clean injector on the right. And as you see on the bottom left, the fuel comes in along the top of the injector and rides all the way around the outside of the needle and can cause some clogging or deposits in that injector. The fuel only only has a space of a few microns to get through that situation out the tip. The tips are, just a matter of a few microns. You'll see, so those are deposits inside of the injector. The image A and B are the deposits that happen inside the combustion chamber. This is magnified quite a bit. So the deposits the carbon deposits that happen on the outside out of the tip will distort the spray pattern. The idea of an injector is very, very high injection pressures at very small injection tips will cause the fuel to atomize. And those little droplets, they're trying to turn that into a vapor as much as they can, because in a very short period of time, that piston stroke needs to burn all of that fuel. If you picture fuel as a basketball-sized drop, the outside layer starts burning, it has to burn toward the middle. That takes a period of time. If you had that basketball-sized droplet of fuel at very high pressure, maybe it turns into 100 marbles. Well, that same volume of fuel now has a lot more surface area, and a smaller time is needed to burn that fuel completely. And that allows for a cleaner burning engine. Any unburned fuel is the black soot that you see coming out of an exhaust of an old truck. Well, you don't see that soot anymore. That soot's still there. It's just getting caught in the diesel particulate filter, the DPF. So you'll see here, this is another injector. This is a Huey style injector from a 6-liter diesel. And you'll see that red fuel flows through the inside and around the needle at the bottom and out the tip. What it does is the injection happens from high pressure engine oil. It hits that plunger and pushes fuel out at 21,000 psi. It actually overcomes the pressure of the spring that's holding that needle all the way down to seal that tip. And that image to your right, you'll see the needle is actually seated right in that tip down there. So as the pressure builds up, it pushes that needle up, allowing fuel to squirt out of the nozzle holes. And those holes are very, very small. So any debris that gets into that situation can really cause some damage. Now picture that at 20 to 30, 35,000 psi. If a droplet of water gets in there, the droplet of water is larger than fuel droplets. It doesn't fit through that little nozzle hole too easily, and it can start to distort that tip, bend or blow that tip. So water is our enemy. So no water. No matter if you believe in our hocus pocus or the fuel additives that we sell or what the story is, please understand, no water is allowed in a fuel system anymore. It's dangerous and damaging to these engines and shortens their life dramatically. Now think about what happens. Now what we're doing, we used to take, like the previous slide, we took low pressure fuel and hammered it really hard to increase pressure to get it to inject. So right at the tip, we had just 40 pounds of fuel pressure, and then we compressed it very rapidly in a short period of time to get up to that high 20,000 psi. In newer engines right now, piezoelectronic injectors, what we're doing is instead of using a mechanical hammer to inject that fuel once, we're using high pressure fuel, and we're actually able to buzz fuel in. I mean, literally a number of times per piston stroke. But what we had to do, what engine manufacturers had to do, is have that high pressure fuel available. So now in these systems we have, We actually have fuel rails that are at that 30 or 40,000 psi. So in order to get it pumped up that high, you may take fuel from the tank and go through a number of pump and compression stages to get it up to the fuel rail, the common rail. That common rail is sitting at very high temperatures and very high pressures. By the time it gets injected out of the tip, you can have up to 300 to 600 Fahrenheit. It's a tremendous temperature. And at that tremendous temperature, you can actually cook the fuel. Now, remember earlier I said fuel is hydrogen and carbon. We can cook that fuel and create something called carbonaceous deposits, where that fuel can actually start to break apart the hydrogen and carbon atoms. That can also cause polymerization of anything in that fuel that might be like asphaltenes. There's little asphalt molecules that are in there, and they're microscopic, and they're in all fuel, and they're used as energy, and they burn. But with high temperatures, they start to get sticky. They polymerize and start to stick to each other. And if you see there's a red line that says return fuel. It's returning back to the fuel tank. If it polymerizes and starts sticking together, it actually gets big enough to start to get caught in the fuel tank. In extreme situations, I've seen fuel actually look black or gray. It actually changes the color of the fuel, and that can start to get stuck in your fuel filters, especially on some engines or in 3 and 4 and 5 micron filters. You can start clogging those fuel filters and actually make it look like black, like an oil filter. And you might not even be able to get on some engines back to the normal fuel filter changes. If you have a Davco filter, they're a glass bowl filter on a semi, you'll actually see the fuel levels rise and those filters look black. And if you look at the fuel, it might look good and yellow, might look like decent diesel fuel, and you wonder, where's the black coming from? Well, it's these microscopic carbon deposits that are happening. In this situation, you might rub your finger on and get some of that black stuff like you see in this diagram, and it might feel kind of gritty, all right, or hard. That's a carbonaceous deposits from high temperature. You need thermal stabilizers to keep the polymerization from happening, and injector cleaners to keep it from happening as well. If it feels oily or slippery or slimy, it might be asphaltene dropout. And think about that. That's like an oil, like a heavy oil, like an asphalt or like a lube oil. And that's also another thing that has to be thermally stabilized. So remember, all of these little problems that you see in an engine, you've got rough running, hard starting, deposits in injectors, water contamination, corrosion happening, bacteria problems, carbonaceous deposits, asphalt dropout. All of this is happening on the base stock of your fuel that you're getting. And this, you don't know where that fuel's coming from. You don't know if it's got biodiesel in it, how much asphalt it has from the refinery, where that raw material came from. Sweet crude from overseas, sweet crude from the Bakken Formation in Montana. Sometimes we're getting crude out of the middle part of the U.S., which happens to be decent crude, depending on the cost of a barrel of crude. When it gets up to the $120, $30, $40 a barrel, we're getting product out of the tar sands up in Canada that gets sent down to our refineries. That's a very difficult thing to refine. The higher the paraffin wax content, the higher the gelling that happens. There's a lot that goes into fuel. People just think, well, it's fuel, diesel fuel's diesel fuel. What am I worried about? I don't have to worry about anything. It's not true. When that fuel, depending on the quality of that fuel, we haven't even talked about the basics of fuel, which is how much lubricant is in there. There's lubricity that's needed. And as we've refined out the sulfur, side effect of refining to ultra low sulfur diesel fuel is removing lubricity. How much cetane's in that crude? Cetane's a measure of the combustion of that fuel. What about the injector cleaners? What about water concentration from the refinery? What about the amount of paraffin wax? We're going to still talk about that kind of stuff. But how this fuel all comes together as a composition depends. It acts up in your engine on how well it burns. And it used to not be a big deal. A diesel engine could burn anything. You know, the older engines at very low injection pressures, you could pour anything you want to it. You want to clean out your injectors, toss a little tranny fluid in there. Not anymore. You'll damage your engine. People used to put used engine oil in to lubricate. You can't do that. Maybe if it's a 50-year-old tractor, but not on a new engine. There's not a chance. If you look at this diagram, you're going to see variable geometry turbos, EGR, exhaust gas recirculation, coolers, EGR valves, certainly the intake manifolds, diesel exhaust catalysts, diesel particulate filters, selective catalytic reduction, SCR systems, diesel exhaust fluid. There's a $10,000 to $20,000 exhaust system to break down anything that might end up in the atmosphere. Well, that diesel engine's still burning that fuel. We put garbage fuel into that engine, garbage in, garbage out. Well, when you get garbage out, you know what you get? You get clogged exhaust components, horribly clogged. People are switching away from diesel now because gasoline doesn't have a $20,000 worth of exhaust components on it. It's just become a nightmare. We have customers that treat with our products that don't have these nightmare problems because we get the fuel, we remove the water, we have injector cleaners, lubricity agents, cetane improvers, and products that help the fuel to burn more efficiently. These coking problems, anything, when you run a diesel engine, if it's an idling engine, it's a cold running engine. If you run that engine hot, it wants to be run hot, run hard. Just cruising down a highway is not running that engine hard. If you're hauling heavy, if not, shut that motor off. If it's idling, it's going to clog these components horribly. VGT turbos, you'll see these little fins in there. They open and close to change the amount of air pressure needed to keep that engine running properly. These things get clogged horribly, and it locks these blades up and doesn't allow them to move back and forth. We have injector cleaners in our product that when they burn, well, when the fuel burns, it turns that into a hot vapor that will help to liquefy and clean out some of these issues. Sometimes they're too far gone with corrosion, rust, and deposits that are hard as a rock. But the deposits are literally in the exhaust, unburned fuel. See, when the piston stroke runs and you fire that fuel squirts in, that compression engine burns. Any moisture that's in that fuel will turn to steamy vapor. When it goes through an EGR cooler, it drops 600 to 700 to 800 degrees. When it drops, that water vapor will start to get sticky again. It will mix with that unburned fuel and cause a sticky mess that starts to line the inside of these components, stick to all the EGR coolers, EGR valves, intake manifolds, VGT turbos. It's a nightmare for engines. If we can remove water and get it to burn clean, you know what? We're fixing those problems. This is how a DPF works. You've probably all seen this. It basically just catches the unburned fuel and allows the gas vapor to continue through the other side and out the exhaust, to be broken down in the SCR system to get rid of NOx emissions. The DPF collects all the soot. This is like having I describe it as a wire garbage can next to your desk, right? You can fill it with globs of wrinkled up paper, but you clog it with paper, and if you try to blow air through that wire mesh, it's going to be restricted by the paper. Well, that's what happens in these traps. It fills with unburned fuel. Well, now we got to burn the fuel to get rid of the soot or get rid of the blockage. Same thing with the paper. If you light it on fire, you'll end up with a 1/4 inch of ash at the bottom, and you can fill it with paper again. Well, that's what happens as an active regen. We squirt fuel down the exhaust line, wasting fuel economy to flame throw this diesel exhaust catalyst at 400 to 600 degrees going in, turns into 1400 degrees coming out, and burns off all that soot, freeing that trap to get more soot to add in. We think you should reduce that by getting the fuel to burn more efficiently. So we do that. We actually change the fuel composition a little bit with surfactants and allow the fuel to atomize chemically as well as mechanically and allow that fuel to burn more efficiently. Melinda, if you could fire up this video, I'd appreciate it too.
So I think what's happening with the videos is that if people play them independently they work, but they're not
Oh, okay.
broadcasting. Yeah,
Okay.
that's the
Well,
feedback I got from somebody else who's on the
you
call.
did something earlier where you got it to play, and then I could press the play button and it would work. Because right now it's not working for me on my end.
Okay.
So try to play it on your end. Maybe it'll trigger something.
It is playing on my end.
Okay. Well, if everybody could try playing this video, I just know the timing. It's about a minute. Basically, each of these dishes has diesel fuel, the same diesel fuel in it. We use a cotton ball as a wick. The first dish we use power service. The second dish we pour in a little bit of Lucas oil. The third dish is our base product called Enerfuel. And the fourth dish is just the straight number 2 diesel. And what you'll see is everything has soot coming off of it except the one that added Enerfuel. You'll see blue is a high temperature flame and orange is a low temperature flame. So we have a blue hot flame. We're helping that fuel to burn more efficiently. We're helping that fuel to we're helping you to squeeze all the horsepower you can out of that fuel, all the BTUs, get the most power out of your engine and not clog those components. All right, so helps atomize the fuel, burns clean, gives you more power, prevents coking and clogging, easier starts, better fuel economy, more horsepower. Oh, there we go. All right, so this injector that you'll see, again, we have, just real quick, we have products. This is an oil-fired or Huey style injector, hydraulically actuated injector. They use dirty engine oil to fire the injector. Well, that can create its own deposits. So we have an oil flush that's a detergent based, not a solvent based, that really helps to clean that side of the engine out and keep that injector firing the way it should. All right. Now, what everybody's used to hearing when it comes to diesel is cold weather. All of the things we've discussed so far have nothing to do with how cold it is outside. Now, except for ice, I guess. Now we have paraffin wax that thickens in the fuel. That paraffin wax is just candle wax. It's literally can become hardened candle wax. That liquefied microscopic wax crystals that are in there burn and create tremendous horsepower and BTUs. That's why we use diesel to haul super heavy things and not gasoline. Gasoline doesn't have any of that paraffin wax in it. So now what happens to paraffin wax when it gets cold? Those wax crystals start to form and grow and stick to each other, and they start to get big enough so you could see them in the fuel like a hazy wave through the fuel. Your fuel will start to look a little cloudy. So that's the cloud point. It'll still pass through your filters. It'll still run your engine. You don't have any problems. But that cloud point is an indicator that just a few more degrees and a little more time colder, a few more degrees colder and a little more time spent, you're going to hit a problem called the cold filter plug point. And that's exactly the number that if you buy your own fuel from fuel suppliers, you should ask them, what's my cold filter plug point today? Right now, I just got a sample of fuel coming out of a fuel station in Buffalo, and that sample was sent this week. And the cold filter plug point of that base fuel was 0 degrees. Now, June or July, it's +5 to +10. The last time I did that in June, it was +8 degrees. So coming out of the rack, which means coming out of the pipeline, it's at 0 from the refinery today. All right. So if this temperature blast hits you at, let's say something really freaky happens, or you take that fuel and you leave it in a truck right now and you park it until December and we hit +5 degrees, you're going to gel that truck up and you won't be able to run that motor. All right. So cold filter plug point means that fuel, there's enough paraffin wax in there, it sticks together, starts to fall to the bottom, becomes a thick mess, and it won't pass through your 5 to 10 micron filters on your truck. Pour point is where that's the only people concerned about pour point is the fuel delivery company. You can't pour it out of a container. You can't pump it through a hose. You guys don't really care about that stuff. What you care about is cold filter plug point. What is that number? And that's basically what we use are cold flow improvers. So in an additive, if you ask your fuel supplier, how are you treating my winter blend? Like everybody calls it a winter blend, and you're paying more per gallon for a winter blend. Well, what is it? Is it a cold flow improver, or are you selling me kerosene? Cold flow improvers, what they do is they coat the outside of these microscopic wax crystals. And even as you look at how we've refined this fuel, low sulfur fuel were little tiny jagged little crystals that don't look like they'd really stack or stick together. Ultra low sulfur microscopically, look at that. They look like building blocks with nice flat edges that can really stick together nicely and create a big problem and create something called wax dropout, which when they stick together, they fall to the bottom and jam filters. So this is a problem for ultra low sulfur diesel fuel. So what happens with cold flow improvers is they coat the outside of those wax crystals before they start sticking together. It is a preventative. So if you're already gelled up, doesn't matter how much additive you add in as a preventative, as a cold flow improver, all you're doing is taking that one big giant wax crystal and coating it so it doesn't stick to another giant wax crystal. All right, so if it's gelled up, you have a big ball of goo at the bottom, you're just going to coat that one big ball of goo. You need solvents to liquefy this, all right? Solvents will liquefy these wax crystals, allow them to blend back up into the fuel again and burn, okay? That's the way or you bring it back into a very, very warm area and allow it to sit for a period of time for those wax crystals to melt again. Okay, the other thing we do is we blend with kerosene. So kerosene is just diesel fuel without the paraffin wax in it. So you lose fuel economy dramatically. You'll lose a tremendous amount of fuel economy using kerosene, straight Kero. And in the refining process, they remove a lot of the lubricity and a lot of the cetane, all right? So this is a problem. So instead of, and you pay about 20 cents more a gallon for it. So we would recommend that you treat with a fuel additive to coat the wax crystals, to boost cetane, to boost lubricity, to boost cleanliness, and get the fuel to burn more efficiently. And we can do that at 3 to 4 cents a treated gallon. This was a base fuel treated last year in Iowa. The base fuel gelled at plus 8.6 degrees, and with one treatment, a complete fuel treatment, a gallon per 1,000, it dropped 39.6 degrees to minus 31 Fahrenheit of protection. We haven't been at minus 31 in Buffalo ever. So that's a big deal. We increase fuel economy. We have testimonials, enough to pay for the fuel products, the fuel additives. We have service kits that allow us to, I'm skipping along a little bit. The service kits are great. If you think you need injectors, get one of these very inexpensive service kits. You're filling the fuel filter housing with injector cleaner, run the motor outside for about 40 minutes at a high idle. It'll clean those injectors and light them up. If not, then replace injectors. All right, Thawed is a product that will liquefy the diesel fuel and get you back up and running. All right, so that's the diesel. We do not affect SCR systems, which break down NOx. We could go into that in a separate seminar if you need to. So that's diesel. We recommend that you treat your diesel, take care of it, watch your fuel tanks, make sure you treat your engines properly, and they'll treat you properly for years and years and years. We have fleets that treat with our products and never pulled a DPF off ever. Oh, in 200,000 miles, 12-year-old school buses never have a problem. On a quick note, we only have a few minutes left. I'm going to jump into gasoline. Gasoline used to have something in it called MTBE, monotertiary butyl ether. That product, when you burn it, releases oxygen into the exhaust line. Well, that causes cancer in humans and causes a lot of problems for us. So in comes ethanol. Ethanol's been around as a fuel for a long time. It's just basically corn. It's basically it's liquor, right? We refine this and make this ethanol, and we mix it into our gasoline at 10% because burning it at 10% releases oxygen for the O2 sensors to tell the fuel control module how much fuel to inject. So on EFI'd engines, this is a real benefit, but of course it absorbs a tremendous amount of water. Alcohols love water. It'll hold 5 gallons per 1,000, which causes horrible problems with corrosion. That corrosion can cause deposits, oil contamination. It can get to a problem called phase separation. I'm going to skip along here for a minute. Phase separation causes a tremendous issue where if you get to the point of saturation, which is that 5 gallons per 1,000, that water will fall to the bottom and it pulls all the ethanol out with it. So now back in that O2 sensor EFI'd engine, if you burn the fuel that's only at 4 or 5% ethanol because all of it fell out with the water, you have a huge problem of running rich and it leans your motor out, right? So if you burn the high ethanol content water at the bottom, well, now you have a huge burst of oxygen and the engine wants to flood the motor, which can melt the catalytic converter. We've had tremendous corrosion issues, fuel lines get eaten, intake manifolds can blow up from a flooding issue. EGR valves are an issue, deposits are a problem. So again, breaking water down, we've reversed this problem. We've saved gas stations tremendous tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars by a simple treatment of our product called GasRx. All right, so we're preventing water, corrosion, deposits, failures, runnability, and we increase storage. So GasRx will keep store fuel fresh for up to 2 years, and it does everything that a Startron, Stabil, and Seafoam will ever do. But what we do above those is prevent the water problem in the first place. So thank you very much. I know I was running as fast as I could. Hopefully this was a benefit to you guys to hear a little bit about fuel and why it's a problem. Please keep your fuel dry, keep it treated, read the labels and understand what your fuel additives are really doing for you, and treat. Your engines are just dying at a premature age because of all the problems that we have from poor fuel. High-tech engines and poor fuel is a bad combo. We can help you boost it. Use my phone number, call or email me with any problems you might have, any customers, any of you out there that may have engine or storage issues, any question at all. I've been around a long time in this. So thank you very much. Thank you for your time. I know it's precious. And be good to each other. Thank you. Thanks, Melinda.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ron. I really appreciate your time and expertise as well. So for everybody still on the call, I will follow up with a link to a video. So there's a lot of great information that Ron was able to share with us today. So that way, if you want to go back through it and refresh anything, and of course, as Ron said, he's available. And also your Kenworth Northeast outside sales folks are available to help you out as well with any questions. So thanks everyone. And we look forward to seeing you at a future Kenworth Northeast Training Academy event.